have Dmitry Alexin with OneBuild here with me today, but we're gonna wait just a minute before we get actually started and I introduce him officially and get started with the webinar. So welcome, and please just get situated for the moment. Hello again, my name is Jennifer Castleson. I'm with Buildxact, and we're going to get started in just a minute as we have just a few more people join in. Thanks for joining, and if you could tell us where you're calling in from and what you want to learn today, the chat is open. Hello, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Castleson. I'm the Vice President of Ambassador and Industry Partner Programs at Buildxact, and we really appreciate you joining us today. I'm excited to introduce Dmitry Alexin, who is the CEO and founder of OneBuild, and he previously was an economist for the International Monetary Fund, and he was looking at inflation trends there. So we have some expertise on our topic today: materials price inflation in residential construction. And we're excited to have you here to join us. Please, if you could, enter your questions in the chat and we'll address them after he gives his presentation. Lots of great data to review and to think about as you're planning for 2024 and as you're thinking about wrapping up 2023. So thank you so much for being here, Dmitry, and I will pass it over to you.
Jennifer, thank you so much for this introduction, and thanks for everyone who joined the call. I'm really excited to share what we have been able to analyze so far at OneBuild as it pertains to material price inflation, that's specifically for residential construction, specifically for the United States. But let me take you through the next set of slides, and we can talk about how those changes in prices have what has happened, what has evolved, and how this might be applicable to your companies. So I'll skip over this since Jennifer already have introduced me, but what I wanted to point out is I've been looking at inflation trends for the larger part of my career, starting with being at the International Monetary Fund, but most recently I also worked for a real estate developer where we used data science and we used construction prices to be able to help us make better real estate development decisions, and portions of that was also in residential as well as commercial, so kind of a broad spectrum there. With OneBuild, what we do is we analyze costs on construction materials, construction labor, construction equipment, and we essentially compile that in a singular database that gets updated every month. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but essentially what we have been able to do with Buildxact is we've merged our forces together, and we have provided Buildxact with access to all of that cost data for labor, for materials, for equipment that you can now access inside of the Buildxact pricing assistant. There's a button in the Buildxact interface that allows you to access that data. And so you might be asking, well, what can I do with construction cost data? Many things, specifically, as it pertains to this presentation, we can talk about how you can beat inflation and how you can stay ahead of changes in construction costs. Being on top of your costs, on top of your prices, allows you to stabilize your margins, allows you to expand your margins. So that means you're making more money, you're putting more money in your pocket, and that allows you to stay more competitive. You know, whether if you're evaluating subcontractors, if you're evaluating vendors, you may know, what to compare those costs to as you are making those, bidding decisions. And finally, you can price your labor a little bit better. This is always, there's an art and the science to pricing labor, but at least you can now know what is happening in the labor markets. So if you haven't checked out the pricing assistant inside of Buildxact, make sure you do that. If you don't have a Buildxact subscription, make sure you get the subscription so that you can give that a try. So what are we going to talk about today? What are we going to talk about in terms of inflation? So what OneBuild has done, building on top of our experience analyzing costs of the past 4 years, is we've compiled a lot of data on construction costs. We work directly with suppliers, we work directly with subs and GCs to aggregate their information, their costs, their pricing about labor, materials, equipment. And that allows us to understand where the market is. And so what we decided to do recently, and this is actually the first time we're presenting this, is we've compiled all of this information into what we call a building price index, a BPI. And so on this call here, we're actually going to be presenting this BPI for the first time. You're the first audience who will get to see that sort of presentation live. So what I'll talk about here is I'll touch on how different materials, a couple of specific materials have changed over the past 12 months. I took a sample of 3 materials that I thought would be representative here. We'll talk about lumber. Obviously, that was there's a lot of crazy things that have happened and continue to happen with lumber. We'll talk about drywall. We'll talk about siding. Those are just 3 that I selected because I thought they would be quite appropriate for this audience, as a lot of you folks probably use these materials on your projects. So you'll be able to get a sense for where those are today. And then we're going to talk about things at a high level. We're going to analyze what is happening to the construction industry as a whole. And we will discuss sort of the overall price index. What we like to say here is, what does it cost to build a whole house? Like, how does that index have evolved? And we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about how you can look at this index depending on what sort of components of the construction scope that you take on. And finally, we will talk about how does all of this data, all of this information actually become relevant to you? How does this impact your business? How can you make different decisions, hopefully better decisions, by being armed with this information? So we'll get into that in the last part of this presentation. So let's talk about material costs first. What I wanted to start with is just discussing the lumber prices, the rock carpentry. And you can see on this chart here, this has undergone a massive decline. Not that lumber is truly cheaper versus the long-term trend, but what we have seen in the 2021, somewhat in 2022, is an anomalous environment where lumber prices have just been through the roof. And obviously that skewed a lot of your estimates, that skewed your ability to obtain some of these materials. And as a result, I'm sure that 2021, 2022 is when a lot of you folks started thinking about, how these fluctuating material costs impact your companies. In the past, of course, the materials did not fluctuate as much as they do today. And so that was kind of a big change. Lumber really is one of those materials that have drove that change. But what has been happening since then? Over the past 12 months, the prices of lumber have been really, I don't want to say plummeting. I think it's a better way to say it, stabilizing, returning to normal. But we've seen is almost a 40%, over 40% decline in terms of lumber prices, rock carpentry prices over the past 12 or so months, as they are returning back to normal from that peak. We're not seeing the same supply chain issues that have been plaguing this industry before. That has become a lot easier. The construction activity, you probably are all noticing as well, is returning to somewhat of a normal. And so over the coming next several months, we are seeing lumber continuing to stabilize. We're not seeing any major increases in prices at this point. Maybe slight declines, but at this point, lumber is essentially what we like to say trending sideways. Is going to stay about the same probably over the next at least short-term period, unless there's any additional dramatic changes. Drywall is obviously another large input into any project, and I wanted to highlight drywall here because I think drywall is performing pretty much in line with what we're seeing in the broader economy today. I'm sure a lot of you folks are staying on top of what's going on with inflation in general, right? The prices have been trending up, and drywall is not an exception here. So drywall is up, but we're seeing about 5.5% over the past 12 months or so. And so that's trending along with our inflation indicators. The inputs here, why is drywall becoming more expensive? It's really primarily driven by the production costs, increases in production costs, increases of prices in the overall economy. And we expect drywall to continue to climb up in line with what other prices are. Not a dramatic increase, but it will continue to move upwards over the coming months. So something that you can anticipate. I also wanted to highlight siding. Siding is an interesting outlier here. And we've seen a more than average increase in the siding costs, about 12% over the past 12 months or so. It is similar in a way to drywall in terms of its increase in overall cost, but somehow we have observed a faster than overall inflation in siding. And we're not exactly sure why that is happening. Why is it faster than other aspects of construction and other materials in a typical construction project? But somehow the increase has been a little bit more dramatic, and I just wanted to highlight that so that you folks are aware. So if you're doing a lot of exterior, if you're building using siding in your construction projects, something to stay on top of is how this price has changed, and as you're working with your clients, if you have estimates, if you have costs that are built into those estimates that are a little bit older, maybe over 12 months old, definitely do make sure that you adjust them so that you stay competitive and so that your margins stay high given where the market currently is. Now, do we expect siding prices to continue increasing? The answer is no. There isn't necessarily any specific macroeconomic driver that we're seeing that is causing this type of increase. There are some increases in the oil prices that are currently happening. That may or may not increase the prices of siding, but we do not anticipate the increase to be dramatic. And in fact, as we look at the data, we're kind of seeing the trend to flatten out and the siding prices to probably begin to stabilize and to remain a little bit more steady than they have been up to this point. Now, let's put things together. So as I said, what One Build has developed is what we call the Building Price Index, specifically for construction materials. And so what we have done is we've connected essentially a basket of construction materials that would be used in a given construction project, residential construction project, new home construction specifically. And so we try to sort of analyze that as a single inflation gauge to figure out where the things are trending. And so we can report on that quarter over quarter, month over month. And so when we put all of that data together to understand what's really going on, what we saw was quite surprising. We saw that the overall cost to build a home has actually declined 12% over the past 12 months. But as we dug into that data to understand what is driving that overall cost decline, we actually observed that it is largely driven by the changes in the rough carpentry, in the lumber components of a residential construction project. So, if you are building ground up, new homes, this is quite, relevant to you because, your lumber package is now cheaper than it has been 12 months ago. Not necessarily that you now have to change what you are charging your homeowners or your clients, but this at least allows you to maybe even maintain the same prices, or you could be more competitive and lower your prices. But at least that you have a bit more of a cushion when it comes to rough carpentry. The supply chain issues have subsided as well. It's the things that have impacted lumber and impacted other components of construction have now declined in severity. We are always seeing changes in supply chain. We're always seeing macroeconomic issues that are impacting that. It might be geopolitical issues like a certain war, but overall, this is not as pronounced as it has been during COVID, which is driving a stabilization in overall construction prices. Now, things are different if you exclude lumber. Now, lumber obviously is a big component in any ground up project. Now, if you're in remodeling, if you are working with existing construction, or if lumber is just not a big part of what you do, then the situation is a little bit different. So here you do need to anticipate price increases. Things are trending upwards. So we are seeing about 3% increase over the past 12 months in overall residential construction, typical residential construction project. And we do feel that this is going to continue to increase, again, in line with the overall market, in line with construction, in line with the economy. So make sure that you are adjusting those expectations, whether you're in new construction or in remodeling, because this is going to be different for the types of projects that you work on. Now let's talk a little bit about what does this mean for you? What can you do to mitigate the impacts of inflation? And I'm sure folks in the audience have other ideas as well, and would love to, as we move on to the kind of the last slides here, to have a bit of a dialogue and a conversation about what can be done, kind of knowing that data. But these are some of the things that we have seen other contractors adapt in their process. So one of the obvious things that you can do is just to diversify suppliers. First and foremost, try to get bids from a variety of different vendors, a variety of different, if it's a lumber yards or supply houses, and always try to invest in that additional upfront conversation with multiple suppliers to understand who's charging what materials are available at a given supplier, so that you can have a broader picture. A lot of folks, obviously, due to the lack of time, can only go to a single supplier and then obtain information from them, but you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot by not being competitive enough. So try to diversify your essentially portfolio of suppliers to be able to stay price competitive. Now, another thing that you can do, and not a lot of folks are aware of that, is that you can renegotiate your pricing. So if you've been a customer with a supply house, you can actually go back to that supply house. You can say, well, we've been working together for several years. What can we do to make sure that I stay a committed customer of yours? And often enough, that conversation will result in a additional set of discounts, additional set of incentives to make sure that you stay their customer. Lumberyard supply houses are definitely willing to have these conversations, especially today, given where the market is. And so if you have not done that yet, go ahead and try. Another thing that is not very well known by probably a lot of folks in this call is the concept of rebates. And Wendell has actually been also looking into rebates. A lot of people, when they think about rebates, they think it's climate or green construction related rebates. I'm not talking about those. This is a whole other subject. What I'm talking about are rebates you can get from manufacturers. So if you use certain products, new construction projects like Kohler or Boise and others, you can actually work with these manufacturers to obtain a rebate on the products that you use. So if you used, let's say you've installed a certain amount of Kohler fixtures, you can actually send a request to Kohler and say, hey, because I've been using so much of your material, I'd like to get a rebate. And manufacturers have those rebates available. What you got to do is you got to talk to a national accounts rep that will help you to navigate the rebate process. But that's another way you can save on construction materials, is by obtaining those rebates. If you are not, let's say if your volume is too small as a construction company, and you don't have enough volume to negotiate a discount or a rebate, another thing you can do is you can join a group purchasing organization, a GPO, and with that GPO, they can negotiate on your behalf as well. The GPOs would typically take some kind of cut on that negotiated price, but that allows you to also lock in some of those discounts that you might not have been able to access on your own otherwise. So consider doing that. Now, something that we have seen contractors do, and that's not available to every contractor because it really depends on your location, but something we have seen contractors do is warehousing. So if you are in a geography where maybe the cost of real estate is not so high, like I was talking to a contractor yesterday who's in New York City, he's in Manhattan, so there's no way he can get a warehouse space in Manhattan that is cost effective. But if you are in a location where you can get a warehouse, what we have seen folks do effectively is essentially warehouse that inventory when the prices are cheaper. So sometimes, you might be able to lock in a material that is not, readily available. If you can buy that in bulk, and you have some predictable stream of projects, then you can just store that at a warehouse and then pull that out of the warehouse as you complete those projects. And so that will allow you to two things. So first, you will know the price because you lock that price in, almost like a futures or forward contract, I guess, with yourself. And that allows you to make sure that your estimate stays consistent, stays stable. And the second thing is you just have the predictable inventory. So you're not worried that that specific material is not available at a future time when you're actually trying to complete the project. And so that will help you secure some of that additional, essentially fixed price, but also build a better relationship with the client, because now the client can feel certain that you'll be able to complete the project on time. And so those inventory issues will not be a problem there. And then finally, of course, it's leveraging technology. I think today, and I was just talking to Jennifer about it before this call, the contractors who are able to embrace technology, the contractors who are able to embrace access to data will be able to get ahead of everybody else. So if you're on this call already, it is clear that you are somebody who is interested in technology. You're somebody who is interested in leveraging technology to improve their business. But I would say that is a really important step. And this, I think, partnership between Buildxact and OneBuild also allows you, if you're a user of Buildxact, allows you to stay on top of fluctuating prices and be able to make sure that your bids are always competitive because you know what things cost. So those are just some of the tips that I wanted to recommend and discuss with you folks. But this is pretty much it as far as my part of the presentation here. But what I wanted to do at this point is perhaps to open up the floor and have a bit of a discussion, answer any of the questions you might have, and then we can go from there.
Thank you so much, Dmitry. That was fantastic, and it sounds like there's so much more to learn from you. And I'm going to kick us off with a couple questions if I can. So if you want to, anybody, if you want to get in touch with Dmitry, you can see his email address there, Dmitry@onebuild.com. And then you can see their website address, onebuild.com. And then their X account, which is at Dmitry_Alexin. So make sure you flag that and follow him. And if you want to kick the slides off, Dmitry, I want to start off by talking about labor, which is not exactly a product, but how are you seeing labor trends and the cost of labor, and are there specific geographies where it's changing the most, or what are you seeing in terms of labor right now?
Yeah, that is a really great question. We actually have a separate labor sort of analysis that we've been working on. I can talk about it a little bit. So overall, labor everywhere is trending up. So there are labor shortages that all you folks know are very consistent, and that has been the case for several years. Some of the other things that we have observed when it comes to labor is also just regional differences and sort of the cause and effect between those regional differences. So if we start just talking about carpentry, what we are seeing is that there are more shortages for certain types of carpentry contractors in certain states over others, and the costs of labor are also higher. So we're seeing some of the highest costs for carpenters being in Colorado, Missouri, Hawaii, and the less expensive tend to be in Mississippi, Oklahoma, and South Carolina. We're digging into what might be behind those discrepancies in labor costs. But we know Hawaii is just a notoriously high cost of living, which causes these costs to be a little bit higher. Colorado, we're seeing has some stringent licensing requirements and a lot of regulation that seems to be driving some of those costs up. And so those are some of the factors that I think we want to consider when we think about labor costs. We also did a study on electricians and plumbers. When it comes to electricians and plumbers, we are seeing substantially higher costs for both on the West Coast. Washington, Oregon, they just tend to have more expensive plumber and electrician contractors. And a lot of it, what it has to do is again, regulation, specific licensing requirements, but also increased demand for energy efficient solutions. So a lot of these states where energy efficiency has been prioritized are seeing an increased demand for electrical labor. And that may be whether that's a heat pump installation or it is your solar installation. So those MEP contractors are becoming more valuable there. We're seeing other, I guess, changes geographically across the board, but I think those are the ones that stand out to me especially. And so if you're operating in some of those states, just keep in mind that those differences do exist. If you are able to source labor from adjacent geographies, and that's ever a possibility, that could be something to consider. If you are a trade contractor and you're trying to see where you can maximize the revenue, it does feel like, especially if you're doing something with MEPs, it feels like targeting those states that have prioritized green energy might be an interesting opportunity for you as well.
That's fascinating, and I love that. Thank you for not only giving me the answer, but going beyond and telling me how they could deal with it. That's perfect. So when you were talking about green states that are focused on sustainable solutions, let's say some of them that have banned natural gas, are you seeing that in terms of what prices are coming across? Are things getting more expensive due to those types of that increased demand? And are you seeing things straighten out in terms of the supply chain as well?
Yeah, so for these specific types of labor, as I said, like electricians, plumbers, like MEPs, mechanical, especially if it's specialized labor that deals with green energy, there's definitely heightened demand for that labor. New York is another state I did not mention that is seeing a similar type of cost increases. So that's definitely true. Now, when it comes to supply chain, we are seeing those issues have subsided quite a bit. So I can't quite say we're back to normal. When it comes to supply chain, there are still risks. And what's especially difficult is for contractors the relationships with suppliers have also changed. A lot of suppliers have been burned by those fluctuations in supply chains. And as a result, it is harder to lock in a price now as it used to be in the past. We're seeing price lock-ins being extended for just a week. maybe a couple of weeks at most, where in the past, you could have asked for a much larger extension on a certain price for an item. The same thing happens with inventory availability. Things may be available today, but not so much tomorrow. So that has not quite stabilized just yet. The upstream factors that are causing that are improving, right? We are seeing that, for example, the overall cost of containers and shipping is trending down, right? The trade has normalized. The ports that would accept those shipments have also become less busy. All of these factors are contributing to normalization of supply chains. Obviously, COVID is lockdowns that have produced a lot of that are no longer there. But that being said, I don't think that we have returned to the same world that we used to inhabit in the past before COVID. And the suppliers, the supply houses, the distributors, they're not quite operating in the same way as they used to. So that has changed. I think for contractors, they just need to, I guess, acknowledge the fact that we're not most likely coming back and working with a distributor on the terms that they have set out now is probably going to be the new norm.
Awesome. So final question for me, and anybody else has questions, please put them in the chat. But final question for me is, you're working with a lot of suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, and how are you seeing them transfer or transition into online marketplaces? Are you seeing more inputs from Amazon.com? And what are you seeing in terms of e-commerce for the pros?
Yeah, very, very interesting. It depends on what part of I guess your construction project you're looking at, and depends on sort of who you're working with. There are certainly a lot of suppliers who have now embraced e-commerce, and it's definitely a broad array of suppliers. You have the big box retailers. They are aggressively pursuing relationships with what they call pros, the pros market. So all of you folks on this call. And so, if you are working with Lowe's, if you're working with Home Depot, there's definitely opportunities for you to deepen that relationship, negotiate better rates. And by the way, if there's ever something that we can help with, we definitely can help navigate that. Now, when it comes to other suppliers, Build.com, Ferguson, all of these have had online presence for a while. So fixtures, finishes, tile, a lot of HVAC. You can now purchase a lot of these online through e-commerce stores. Now, where we're not seeing that as much is more so on the carpentry, lumber, doors, windows. And the reasons being there, I think, is just a lot more complicated to run an e-commerce operation if you are in one of these businesses, right? Because if you're buying, just tile, it is a product you can ship, right? If you're working with a supply house that is a lumber supply house, this is almost a manufacturing process for them, and so it is a little bit more complicated. Though we are seeing a lot of those are also embracing technology. I think Menards has like a pretty robust e-commerce website. And if the USLBM is doing a lot of strides in that direction too. But everybody's different too. A lot of the supply houses that we speak with, they tend to be more localized. They have a more kind of contained maybe group of folks that they work with on a regular basis, and they just prioritize those relationships over technology. And at this stage, it may be the best strategy for them. But we are seeing also a lot of folks are trying to transition more towards a more e-commerce sort of driven interface.
Amazing. I don't see any more questions. So thank you so much, Dmitry. This is fantastic. Great conversation, great presentation. Really appreciate you being here. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Remember to follow Dmitry on X. Dmitry_Alexin is his channel. So please join him there. And thanks again for everybody for participating.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.